From the CISO series, it's Cybersecurity Headlines.
Scattered lapsus hunters, a crowdsourced ransomware campaign, California law lets consumers universally opt out of data sharing, and hundreds of millions of business PCs are still on Windows 10 as the end day nears. These are some of the stories that we have selected from this past week's cybersecurity headlines, and we are now looking forward to some insight, some opinion, and some lively expertise from our guest, Dustin Sachs, Chief Technologist over at the Cyber Risk Collective, and the inimitable Mike Lockhart, CISO over at Eagle View. And we are also on the line with, of course, the big boss man, David Spark, and our glorious producer, Steve Prentice, lurking in the background. We may hear from them as well. Also, in our hearts today, we have our sponsor, ThreatLocker. Assume everything is a threat. If you're listening to this show as a podcast, remember that next week you too can join us and our loyal band of vocal experts on YouTube Live. Do so, go to CISOseries.com, hit the events, drop down and look for the Cybersecurity Headlines Week in Review image. If you click on it, you can join us. And for those of you that are here with us right now, be sure to contribute your comments in the chat. I know Dustin and Mike are not going to be holding back anything on the mic, so you should not hold back as well. Let us know what is resonating with you, what you're enjoying, or just have a lively side discussion about the 20th anniversary Mac and how it was just such a weird piece of hardware. I don't know. Any conversation is valid in the chat. And if none of that sounds good to you, feedback at CISOseries.com is the electronic mail address you can utilize to your advantage. Before we jump into this, just a quick reminder that Mike and Dustin's opinions are in fact their own, not necessarily those of their employers, their staff, or indeed their clergy. We've got about 20 minutes though, so let's jump right into it. First up here, Dustin, I got to start with you here. A lot of interesting news this week. What was the big story for you in cybersecurity that, I don't know, maybe resonated in your context or just you couldn't get out of your brain?
I think the one that we're going to talk about, crowdsourced ransomware, is an interesting escalation of what we've seen and what we've traditionally seen, and I'm interested to dive into that one with you.
It is amazing that the bar for ransomware stories has risen so dramatically just since we started the show in the last 5 years. The last 5 years ago, it'd be like, oh, 10,000 people were impacted by this ransomware. It was like, ha ha ha, and we're now at Kickstarter ransomware. I mean, Mike, am I losing my mind here? Like, is the escalation of ransomware notability kind of ridiculous these days?
Oh yeah, no, it's been in an amplitude that's been just absurd for quite a period of time. The data shows us that we're starting to drop a little bit when it comes to the overall cost, but the attacks are happening. They're happening in different and more creative ways now that are actually a little bit more terrifying than the loud and noisy ransomware actors.
You want to talk about creativity in an age of AI. Look to the threat actors. They indeed are our inspiration. All right, Mike, since we have you up on the screen here, what was your big story of the week that, I don't know, just kind of grabbed you by the coattails?
So there's been a few things that have happened this week, but one of the ones that really stood out to me is the fact that the Windows 10 expiration date is knocking on the door, and there are still tons and tons of companies that are really just waiting to, update. And it seems to be a constant struggle with enterprises. These major end of life, end of support events happen.
All right, I gotta pull the room here. Windows XP, the hardest version of Windows to ever get off of. Was there anyone that's more notable, at least in your careers, that you've had to deal with?
I'll go with XP only because I don't think anybody actually installed Windows ME anywhere, but XP would certainly have to take. 7 wasn't particularly fun either. So
okay, yes, I kicked and screamed to move to that weird tile of Windows 8. Mike, what about you?
I was trying to get early 2000s, getting organizations off of Windows NT, and for good reason. It worked, and it was actually shockingly stable. And telling an organization that you have to move to something that's a little bit more, Windows Server 2000 or other tools that were out there, they didn't really want to make the move. The NT kernel, the early version, was just a good piece of software, but people had to be dragged kicking and screaming away from it.
Little did they know the glories that awaited them with IE6 and all the bountiful non-standard internet rendering that they could have hoped for. All right, let's get into our first story here. Scattered Lapsus Hunters, the crowdsourced ransomware campaign. Dustin and Mike can't wait to get your thoughts on this. So Scattered Lapsus Hunters, turns out not a K-pop Demon Hunters Wish.com version, is letting anyone do their dirty work. So the crime group has been offering a $10, that's not a typo, $10 in Bitcoin to anyone willing to hound executives at companies it claims to have breached. The group has recently claimed to be retiring, posting instructions on Telegram and a new data leak site listing 39 alleged victims, mostly linked to Salesforce integrations, the company that cannot keep taking it on the chin any longer. Followers are urged to email executives until they pay, with higher rewards for using personal accounts or doing an exceptionally well job. Mike, I'm going to start with you here. Crowdsourcing, harassment for pocket change bounties. Should we be treating these as, I don't know, social engineering campaigns at this point, rather than just a pure ransomware operation, and maybe beef up corporate culture to identify and handle, this type of, groundswell of harassment?
So it's an interesting change in culture and in tactics, TTPs, right? Tactics, techniques, and procedures that we're starting to see from these groups. And personal opinion, I have no data to back this up. I think it's a really clever play, and the reason I think it's clever is it's twofold. It's a new avenue that hasn't been explored before, and it's an opportunity for them to test the waters to see if it provides any return on investment. But I think the timing is interesting as well, too. There's economic headwinds that people are feeling, and companies are going through restructurings and reductions in force where they might have a higher likelihood of being able to incentivize somebody. You think about the old CIA mice model of money, ideology, conscience, and ego. And, somebody might be, there might be ego, or there might be some ideology they feel about the current market right now where they can tap into that. So it's kind of a fascinating exercise, and it'll be academically interesting to see how it plays out. As a CISO, though, it's also a new avenue of risk that we have to start really considering.
This almost reminds me of like Amazon's old Mechanical Turk, right? Where you could pay someone like a nickel to like transcribe a sentence or something like that. But it just turns out, instead of Amazon, threat actors. Dustin, this resonated with you. I'm like, kudos for creativity, but also terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think of it, and I almost think of the cartoon of trying to plug a hole in a boat. And as you put the finger in one hole, another hole opens up. As somebody who has been a incident responder and worked in a SOC, it's easy when you've got a finite list of IOCs to look after, indicators of compromise. Now we're just blowing that away, because how do I block against the internet? How do I block every email address that could possibly be out there used? You can't block all of Gmail to say, oh, well, we'll stop all of Gmail. You can't block all email from coming in. So it's a really creative way of basically setting up a scenario where there are no IOCs anymore, because everything is, all your bases are ours, Yeah.
Everything is somehow organic, even though it's completely contrived, right? It's completely directed, right?
Right.
What is also interesting about this too is if you look at a step one layer up, and not just specific point examples, but you look at the behavior of these new threat actor groups. So not new, but the changing behavioral patterns and culture of these threat actor groups. The dynamics are shifting in a way that I don't think a lot of us really would have been able to forecast or foresee. You have this perceived hierarchy over them called the COM, the community, I think is what it's short for. And you have, shiny hunters and Lapsus and others that are sort of loosely organizing, either completely or, partially. And they're going about it differently now. They're not, they're really not kind of, going out this is loud and directed as one. They're taking different tactics where they're just putting a marketplace of all these companies out there. Or in some cases, they're no longer even directly ransomwaring. They're doing data exfiltration, and they're marketing that data, kind of going back to the roots, if you will. So the dynamics are changing, the culture's changing. But it's really interesting seeing, the COM and some of these things, with Scattered Lapsus and others underneath them, where it's starting to homogenize in a way where it's starting to look a little bit more like nation state capabilities. They were already tapping on that door, but if they're able to really get things tied together, they're now just as dangerous as a North Korea or, other geographies where you have those nation state backed capabilities.
Yeah, when you have this traveling Wilbury super group, right, of threat actors kind of all getting together, it does. I do wonder about like the market pressures of that, right? Because I do think we're seeing one consolidation on the highest end of the more economic, maybe, but also geopolitically aligned threat actors. but then also this groundswell because it turns out doing phishing emails is like basically free now. You like there's this very low end, like low sophistication. It's never been easier to be a low sophistication, to do low sophistication phishing. Maybe ransomware is a different play and stuff like that. So I do wonder if this consolidation is also like that kind of market pressure, right? It's harder to be a mid-tier. You have to be a blockbuster threat actor. You can't just be your $80 million action movie threat actor anymore, right?
I do find it interesting, by the way, that this is Lapsus, which we all know started out with a bunch of teenagers. So a bunch of teenagers figured out that the way to do it is to crowdsource being annoying, which is what teenagers largely do on their own anyways. It's in their DNA. So let's now pay people to do what they're doing, what they're, hormonal and doing at that time anyways.
Teenagers truly undefeated at being annoying. Nice
You
job,
know,
Lapsus.
they're just ransomware for the vibes.
All right, let's check the vibes on this next story. California law lets consumers universally opt out of data sharing. California's governor, you may know him, Gavin Newsom, signed a new law requiring web browsers to include an easy-to-find universal opt-out option for data sharing, letting Californians block third-party data sales with one click. The law expands the 2018 California Consumer Privacy Act, which granted the right to send opt-out signals, but didn't require browsers to make them simple to use. Governor Newsom also approved related bills strengthening the state's data broker disclosure rules and requiring social media platforms to fully delete user data upon account cancellation. Dustin, I'll start with you here. A universal one-click opt-out of data sharing gives we could shut down ad tech economy with just a single click. This is revolutionary. Do you think this marks the beginning of real privacy enforcement, at least in part of the U.S., or will we see the tech industry find clever workarounds to preserve the status quo?
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting because I think the corollary to this is the move to streaming. The whole reason the move was to streaming was to avoid having to watch ads, having to watch commercials. I mean, when's the last time you've actively sat and watched a commercial other than the Super Bowl? Most people don't sit and actively watch commercials. Now, at the same time, though, I think it is a really good move towards better privacy in the U.S. because it's going to force organizations and those who are benefiting from that data to really define what are they using their data for and really be crisp and clean and transparent about it, which is important because in this day and age, everything is electronic data. So it's your identity, it's your purchasing habits, it's everything. So giving consumers, that control, it is an important and meaningful step.
Mike, you agree with Dustin here? Is this an opportunity, perhaps, to raise the bar for good or proper data handling policies?
Is it an opportunity? Absolutely. Whether that opportunity is realized or not is the $65,000 question. This also, this is going to introduce some unique challenges. So one is implementation. How are our browser vendors going to get there? And they have some timeline. I did a little looking up on this earlier because, to be honest, I was not really up to speed on this particular change this week, so I had to catch up in short order. It doesn't go into effect until 2027, which seems like it's a ways out, but in the development life cycle, that it'll sneak up before you know it. So browser vendors are going to have to struggle a little bit to prioritize some of these features to meet those requirements. The analytics marketplace, that entire domain is going to really be struggling now to figure out what do we do next. But I think there's going to be some interesting legal aspects of this as well too. There's still a lot of very unsettled decisions on is visiting a website and capturing an IP address, is that considered public information or not? And different circuits view these things differently. So I think really what this will end up doing is act as a forcing function that we've desperately needed to really establish some legal standards and boundaries around what is public data, right? You can think of a street address as public information that's well settled, but in the digital side of things, it's still very muddy in a lot of ways. So getting some of the boundaries established and being very clear and unambiguous about that, I think is really what this will potentially drive us towards, or litigation that's going to try to shoot the laws down and maybe challenge those on a more national scale as well too. So I think all of this comes down to really what we start to see in the legal system and what challenges are brought, what sort of legislative effect it has on knock-on effect it has in other states who may want to follow suit. And I think the browser vendors are going to be in a very tenuous position of monitoring that and making a decision as whether they need to actually invest in these changes or not, but also planning to implement, as well as the analytics and data collection marketplace going, what do we do?
And I think, as Mike brings up, one of the interesting things as well is it's kind of a double-edged sword. It had to happen in California because of where the companies that control this are based. But at the same time, it happened in California. And is that going to be an impediment to getting some national attention because it's coming from California and people have their opinions about the legal system in California being what they are? Is that going to, if this had come out of, Texas or Colorado or some other state, would it have a better effect in the end for the country as a whole, or even at a national level? Or is the fact that it came from California going to be kind of a problem?
Yeah, I think we can look at the impact of CCPA. I mean, certainly, that's on everyone's mind because California is a giant market within the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
But has that fundamentally changed data privacy everywhere? I'm certainly has had some impacts, steered some things. I'm sure for smaller companies that can't afford to do carve outs like that, it's a little easier. But certainly not universally, right? The other thing that I think about this is, are we missing the other end of this is a good for one side of that equation. I also this is me. I'm going to get my Linux hit, my open source hat on here or something like that. But I think of something like Inrupt, where you have more a disaggregated or decentralized approach to owning your own data and kind of controlling that access on your end, versus anytime you visit any website, you're automatically in this legal morass of all the stuff that this bill is trying to address. I do think that there was two sides, and this only addresses one of them. I'm not saying anything like that is ever going to happen anytime soon. Again, I know it's a hippie pipe dream, but I always wonder with these types of solutions if it's only ever going to be half complete because of that.
Yeah, and I think that's where we're going to see a lot of this go. Individually, taking my tech hat off, just speaking as a person, am I highly supportive of it? Absolutely. We sort of joke around, and Dustin, I'm sure you've made this joke as well too. We say a lot, privacy is dead, and to a large degree, that is a truthful statement. But there does need to be a balance of acknowledging that we're in a privacy deficient marketplace and world now, but trying to maintain some modicum of at least trying to pull some tension there, right there. The scales are a little imbalanced right now. If this is an opportunity to balance that and find a better middle ground, great. But unfortunately, we're in a very contentious time when making rational decisions around privacy is going to be a very difficult effort. And I think that, Dustin, to your point too, the geographic origins, depending on who it's coming from, where it's coming from, also come into play as well too. So this is going to be a sit and observe situation for a while. It's going to take, these things don't move fast. The gears of justice grind slow, but they grind fine. And it's just kind of see where it goes over the next 36 to 48 months. It's going to take a while for it to litigate out.
And I'll say, Max Tronic put in the chat, let's create a registry for people that want to opt out. And then my response to that would be, how did the do not call registry work? It's worked so well, right? Let's create a registry for people to opt out, because we've had such success when it comes to mobile phones. I don't know how many of you, I'm sure, Mike, you get spam calls galore. Rich, I know you do too.
Oh, listen, Max Tronic is a big registry fan. Okay, I can't cite him. Listen, when everything's a registry, everything looks like a nail to you. Big boss man, David Spark, hop in here.
For about 5 minutes, it worked.
But do you remember those 5 minutes? They were great.
Yeah.
And why didn't it work? Lack of accountability and enforcement was really at the end of the day, lobbying dollars won.
So what you're saying is we need a patchwork of state privacy laws so that it makes such a mess that the feds have to step in and come over. I mean, that's a policy roadmap right there. Let's rock and roll. Someone we'll get some dark money on that right away. Before we move on to our next story, I have to spend a few moments and thank our sponsor for today, ThreatLocker. Cyber criminals don't knock. They sneak in through the cracks other tools miss. That's why organizations are turning to ThreatLocker. As a zero-trust endpoint protection platform, ThreatLocker puts you back in control, blocking what doesn't belong and stopping attacks before they spread. Zero-trust security starts here with ThreatLocker. All right, next up here, the story that may make us smile the most today. Hacktivists aiming for critical infrastructure get pwned. A pro-Russian hacktivist group called 2Net recently switched from launching DDoS attacks to targeting critical infrastructure. Congratulations on the ambitions, guys. A report from Forescout describes how the group attacked what it thought was a water treatment plant, but was instead a decoy set up to observe the activities of such groups. The full story is available at Bleeping Computer. Link in the show notes. Definitely recommend you check it out. It describes the various steps the group took, believing this to be a real target. This is somewhere between a research program and a honeypot here. Mike, do you think this type of proactive approach should be used more frequently?
Yes, I do. But why do I think it should be used? I think this is a great example of how to adapt honeypots and methodologies to get better intelligence. There are organizations out there that are doing this. I think we should continue to invest in that. The flip side is, did this really do anything meaningful for the threat actor groups? Likelihood is probably close to zero. So the real benefit here is understanding ways in which you can create honeypots that are realistic, that will be attractive targets to these threat actor groups. And as those capabilities grow and improve over time, might give us some new tools that we didn't have in the past as well to create sort of false flag operations. So, Dustin, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, so as I think I said in our prep for this, when I saw this story, the first thing that I thought of was my former CISO I worked for, friend of the show, Sean Bowen, who, if this story had come out, he and I would have talked about, and it would have been something of the equivalent of, bleep around and find out, because this one to me, it's kind of a natural consequences. You can't sit there and hack into critical infrastructure and then be upset when you get owned. It's kind of the fact that we're now adapting to, Mike, to your point, honeypots, to actually, against critical infrastructure. I mean, none of us want to be in a situation where a critical infrastructure asset gets taken down. I mean, we've seen what happens when a water treatment plant gets hit. I've worked at, critical infrastructure where it was literally the control of the lights in the at the time, the third largest city in the country. The last thing you want to have happen, the thing that's always in the front of your mind is, I cannot afford to have this taken down. So I applaud the critical infrastructure operators for thinking of, what's old is new again, and leveraging that capability to thwart an attack.
Well, it's also a good exercise too for their detection teams, their containment teams, their response teams, and I'm very interested to see the after action report on this one here, if there's anything that comes out, because those are some really valuable lessons. And look at, was the honeypot set up in a way where it was sufficiently representative of what a real infrastructure would have been, right? And if that is the case there, then what were the things that they were able to observe for behavioral patterns, and how can you use that for training? So I do think there's a dearth of data to be mined from this. But again, double down on what I said a minute ago, as far as the threat actor group's concerned, they had a little egg on their face. They will regroup and they will retry again. And so there's also some benefit for them too, because they're like, now we got to be a little more careful of that. So just like any operation, once it's been made public and people are talking about it, the value of it diminishes for a period of time too. So it's more of a, let's step back and think very thoughtfully around what worked, how do we continue to apply those lessons, and what does that mean for organizations that want to start thinking about revisiting the traditional honeypot mindset and recalibrating in a way where it would be useful again when it has not really been useful for several years at this point.
Well, and we talk about the flip of, the statement, Mike, that we always use in security, which is you've got to be right 100% of the time. Threat actors only have to be right once. It's nice to see the script flipped a little bit on them, and they actually had to be right, and they ended up not being right. So it's kind of nice to see the script flipped a little bit.
I see. This is the perspective I love, because when I first saw this, I was like, "Oh, this is like a speed bump function, right? Like we're wasting their time." Yes, does this fundamentally change anything? Not dramatically, but if we have enough speed bumps, right? We slow down some speeders, right? Like there is that function, but like the learning function of this, the ability to again, like just even the psychological nature of that, right? Of being like, oh, it's all like any threat actor, like any attack is all gravy, right? It's just like any success is success, right? But now putting the burden of, oh, you were hacking absolutely nothing and wasting on top of that, I think is brilliant. Steve, hop in here. Let us know what you think about this.
I just think it's nice to have them say, hey, you're not supposed to hit back like that. I think it's going to give them pause to think, should we do this? So kudos for them for just at least putting in some degree of concern that they're not invincible as the bad guys. So thumbs up.
It's buying McDonald's coffee and then being surprised that it was hot,
Hey, bleep around and find out.
Exactly.
That's brilliant. All right,
I do I just want to call out CCL in the chat here. Undeniable attribution, and that's a good call out there right there. In this case, it was absolutely undeniable who it was, and little bit of we got you this time.
Yeah.
Speaking of bleeping around and finding out, hundreds of millions of business PCs are still on Windows 10 as end day nears. I was the end of days, I kept wanting to say, but I won't talk about my favorite Arnold Schwarzenegger film. We've talked about this before, but it's a pretty big thing. Support for Windows 10 ends next Tuesday, October 14th. Mark it in red on your calendar and buy a cake. Dang it. According to analyst Kieran Jessup of Omdia, there are 1.4 billion Windows devices running worldwide among individual consumers and businesses. 550 million of these machines are running in corporations, and around half of those will not meet the end-of-life deadline to switch to Windows 11. All right, so we cut up that pie a bunch of different times. So we were like 275 million. I think I roughly have the math right. In many cases, because the devices do not meet the minimum requirements for the upgrade. I had a Surface Go to use as a prop. My son took it to go play games on. So I do apologize for not having my prop work down. But Mike, as of October 14th, the fee for extended security updates will be $61 for the first 12 months. That will double to $122 for the second year and doubling again for year 3. So we're about to see millions of potentially insecure endpoints on corporate networks. How should CISOs approach this reality? Pay up, replace hardware, rethink their endpoint strategy. And hey, if this whole AI thing doesn't work out, Microsoft could rake in a cool $16 billion in year 1 on this thing. Not the worst business to be in. Mike, what are your thoughts here?
So, there's a lot of thoughts on this. For businesses specifically, all businesses have a fiduciary responsibility to go ahead and just upgrade. If this was not already baked into long-term strategy, so for example, personal experience, we started planning this over 18 months ago, and it was discussed, it was planned, it was organized. All of the requisite precursors were put into place as far as figuring out how to refresh cycles, all of the standard business activities that you go through. But in the business world, I think we need to start dividing the problem space. There's those that can and will. There's those that can and maybe are struggling with some budgetary requirements. Those are the ones I actually really feel for, because it is expensive to upgrade if you have a lot of systems you've been kind of hobbling along. But then there's those who can't too. You take a look at let's say manufacturing, for example, and if you have a fleet of devices that are spread out throughout your national or international footprint that are all running Windows 10, and you have 5 volume production and you're managing a very thin roll throughput yield on your manufacturing floor, that's a good example where it's really difficult to upgrade. And so I think it's not a one size fits all scenario. For the general enterprise, pay up, upgrade, get it done. If you don't, it is to a degree, a dereliction of duty. But there are a lot of circumstances where it's the answer is not quite that easy. And before I kick it over to the guests, there's one other part too that I think that is the bigger pain point here, and those are the people outside of the business world, those individual endpoint users who economic headwinds are tough across the globe right now. Maybe they can't afford to upgrade a PC, and this is where I think Microsoft very much dropped the ball in not thinking about the the risk they're creating to the general population. It is the most used operating system in the world, and billions of people use it on a personal basis. If they can't afford to upgrade, I get why Microsoft is wanting to do this. The intention is right, but the execution leaves a lot to be desired, and leaving a lot of people holding the bag and going, now what? And it creates a lot of global risk. And where's their accountability in that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I struggle with two things. First of all, is if this is a headline for somebody that this is the first time they're hearing this, that's a bit concerning. Since as somebody who ran global GRC operations for a Fortune 100 company, the minute they announce this, the GRC teams are saying, guys, you got to upgrade, you got to upgrade, you got to upgrade. And we get to, a week, 4 days beforehand, and all of a sudden now it's like, oh yeah, they were serious. The other thing is certainly if you're into investing in the market, I would certainly be buying Microsoft shares because their revenue is about to go through the roof for the fourth quarter. Because what's going to end up happening is you're going to have a lot of organizations that are going to say, you know what, it's just cheaper to pay the extended service for 3 years than for me to try to fix it. And in some cases, you may have a legitimate reason to have to do that for all the reasons Mike said. You can't, if you're running an OT system that's an operational technology system, you're not going to be able to upgrade from Windows 10. It's just not feasible.
Or I think on the healthcare side too. Like I'm sure that's a major problem too.
I mean, that's the reason we still see XP and Windows 7 around, and and have seen it around for a lot longer than it should be. And I think Mike brings up another good point, which is, what about the average user? What about the person sitting at home who can't maybe pony up the $99 it's going to be to upgrade to the new operating system? And God forbid you have multiple computers in your house because you've got, multiple family members using computers, So it is an interesting one. And it's one that it's interesting because it keeps coming up, and we keep hitting these milestones, and we keep doing the same things every time. And every time we say we'll do it better next time, and we fail to do it better next time.
An end of life end of support for anything is shockingly difficult, and it's hard to explain sometimes for people who haven't necessarily lived in that world, because there's a lot of lived experience that comes along with it. But this is a large example of end of life end of support that it's hard to stay ahead of, and it can be cycle time with the people in the field. What's my depreciation schedule of my hardware? Did I just refreshed my hardware a year ago, but I went with lowest possible bidder, and they don't have the right kind of TPM chips or secure BIOS in there. Great, I can't upgrade. But more importantly, it's really just all of the things. You think about all the different asset domains that a technology organization may have. You have your endpoints, you have your servers, you have your network hardware, but then you have the softer parts, which is I'm running Node, and I have this huge Node ecosystem for Node.js and all of the semantic versions for those packages. Why organizations like Sneak exist, to help manage vulnerabilities, but also end of life end of support. And what happens when .NET 7 end of life, and now I have this tech stack that's all built on that, and I have to upgrade it, or PHP 8 goes end of life, and now I need to upgrade to the next version of this. So end of life end of support is a fundamental and foundational skill that every security function inside of a business has to have. But it also has to be part of the larger corporate risk conversation as well, too. It's not just security. And if your organizations aren't talking about end of life and support as a top level risk factor for the business, of which cyber is a big component, but not all of, then there's a huge miss in the ability to forecast and stay ahead of those risks.
Well, and you run into even more trouble when you throw in some of the regulations that are out there. I was at an organization where UK Cyber Essentials was a mandatory thing because of the amount of business we were doing with the UK government. And end of life out of support is the thing that will get you to a failing grade. Like it's a do not pass go, do not collect $200. So you have to address it, and you have to be addressing it. And even those organizations struggle. So what about the organizations where it's not a critical?
Yeah, where you're not under the gun like that. How do you get that? And Mike, to your point about individual users, I also think about SMBs, like that kind of stuff, where again, you're something that is perfectly functional, right, for you, and now you're facing that additional expense again. Shouldn't have been a surprise to you, but as CCL pointed in the chat, This is this is mandatory hardware requirements for anyone with no or outdated TPM hardware. Microsoft's own devices fall under that, so it's not like they were future proofing them for that far out. So I'm sure a lot of people definitely feeling that.
And
pain.
Mike, do you want to go talk to the developers and tell them that after all the development work they've just done, now you've got to upgrade the operating system on them and make them change everything? How's that conversation going to go?
No.
You're probably walking out with a couple of bruises.
You're going to need a shop vac for all the dust, for all that teeth grinding.
The individual human factor, though, is really what bugs me the most, right? And again, take the CISO hat off, just at a personal technical practitioner level. How do I explain to my 75-year-old aunt who has been phished previously? We did a lot of work to lock her accounts down and educate her on two-factor authentication, and will call me with questions. How do I tell her that she has to go spend X amount of dollars in buying a new system that's now going to be able to support Windows 11? And she's already terrified enough because she has been through some events where her bank account almost got vacuumed out. I mean, these are the unintended but large consequences of these types of corporate decisions where at times, I do not foundationally believe that they've been litigated appropriately at a leadership level within companies like Microsoft and others that sort of voice this. And I get it, it's hard to do. But there are a lot of people who are going to be very negatively impacted by this because they're going to lose their ability to defend their endpoints. And when I say defend endpoints, they have installed the software they've been told to install. They've done the right things, but they don't know what they don't know. And Microsoft is putting them at risk.
Well, and Mike having to explain Mike having to explain to your 75-year-old grandmother how to use Windows 11 after you just got her out learning how to use Windows 10 is a whole nother debate there as well.
All right. Well, thank you to everyone that was contributing in our chat. My interface is all messed up. I cannot see the chat rolling through, so I do apologize. But I know I saw CCL, I saw Maxtronic in there, and a bunch of other comments as well. So definitely appreciated. Thanks to each and every person that was taking the time to join us. Get in on that chat. It always makes the show more fun. Dustin and Mike, where can people find you on the cyberspace? We're throwing to LinkedIn. Is that a good place to follow what you're up to online?
Absolutely. LinkedIn, you'll find me sometimes talking about work and sometimes making very snarky comments that have absolutely nothing to do with technology.
Yeah, and I'm at LinkedIn as well. A lot of information about my recently released book and what I'm doing around behavioral science and cybersecurity, but really excited to be here, really thankful and appreciative. At Rich, as we've talked about before, I got introduced to the CISO series, met Sean Bowen, got my last role prior to the one I'm in now because of CISO series. So very appreciative to, finally make it on here and represent that group that has benefited directly from this.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on, both of you, Dustin and Mike. Truly, truly appreciate your time. You're having some fun with the headlines and just your insight. This has been a spectacular time. Thank you guys so much. Thanks also to our sponsor for today, ThreatLocker. Assume everything is a threat. And thanks again to our, maybe if I don't hit my mic when I'm gesticulating wildly, thanks to our audience today. We can't always get everything up on the screen, but we appreciate you being here. Don't forget, you can send us feedback at CISOseries.com. Let us know what you think about the show or indeed about the news of the week. And if you're sharing it with your team, if you have your team listen to one of our shows, like just the regular headline show, the weekend review or something like that, we want to hear how you're helping, how the show helps you in your job. That is always a big thrill for us. So please send those on, feedback at CISOseries.com. Remember to join us next week for another episode of the Week in Review that starts at 3:30 p.m. Eastern. And just a heads up, we may be having some new programming changes coming up with the Week in Review, maybe playing with some more formats. So stay tuned. Check out CISOseries.com for more announcements about that. Some really fun stuff is coming in the pipeline. To register to join us for all of our shows, for all of our events, whether we're doing a Super Cyber Friday or whether we're doing the Week in Review, head on over to the events page at CISOseries.com. And if you want just your daily news fix, you got to subscribe to Cybersecurity Headlines. Give us about 6 minutes. We'll get you all caught up. For myself, for the big boss man, David Spark, for our glorious producer, Steve Prentz, and indeed for all of our wonderful guests that we had on today, here is wishing you and yours to have a super sparkly day.
Cybersecurity headlines are available every weekday. Head to CISOseries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.